A memorable death scene in a movie can sometimes outlive the movie that it's actually from, but sometimes truly traumatizing ones just aren't talked about nearly enough by film fans. And so, if you haven't already seen the following movies or just don't remember these scenes, they're absolutely worth checking out. I'm Josh, and today we're talking about disturbing movie deaths nobody remembers. First up, we've got Pete Henrik, The Grey. Of course, everyone remembers the end of The Grey, where Liam Neeson's John Otway prepares for the scrap with the alpha wolf, which I'd have had him if it was me, let me tell you, no question about ambiguity. I've got that wolf in a headlock and just gone like, oh, Avia, 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 Avia. Nobody really talks about the low-key, horrifying death of his fellow plane crash survivor, Pete Henrik, a little while earlier. Henrik is the only remaining survivor other than Otway who hasn't yet succumbed to the bitter elements, but he dies a chilling death all the same when he falls into the river while fleeing the attacking wolves and becomes trapped underwater. Otway desperately tries to pull Henrik free and even attempts to administer rescue breaths, but Henrik is panicking and not even remotely trying to hold his breath, and frankly, I can't blame him. Otway then continues to try and free Henrik until his underwater screaming just goes silent and it's clear that he's drowned. Between Henrik's sheer panic at the situation and the fact that he drowns in water that's just a few feet deep makes this one of the most realistic drowning scenes in any movie ever, and it's all the more traumatizing for it. Next up, we've got Coco, Blade Runner 2049. Blade Runner 2049 is remembered for many things, namely being an incredible sequel that arguably surpasses its predecessor, at least in my opinion, but perhaps its single most distressing moment is scarcely talked about these days. See, in the film, Coco is a coroner who catches replicant enforcer Love stealing the remains of replicant Rachel from the morgue and dies horribly because of it. At this point, Love hands Coco what he believes to be documents authorizing her procurement of Rachel's remains. Yet a second later, she smacks Coco in the back of the neck with an incredible amount of force. Coco then immediately falls to the floor and begins bleeding from the eyes, nose, and mouth, dying slowly from this extremely traumatic head injury, all the while Love, without missing a beat, just returns to pick up the rest of Rachel's remains. It is a horrible way to die, obviously, made all the more unsettling by just how utterly routine and unremarkable it seems for Love, given that they're a replicant and all. Next, we have Westray, the Counsellor. The Counsellor is undeniably one of Ridley Scott's most divisive films, and yet, despite releasing barely a decade ago, it's largely been lost in the shuffle amongst his prolific filmography. And this is despite the fact that it features one of the most brilliantly unnerving death scenes in any movie, well, ever. Near the end of the film, Westray is attacked in London by an assailant working for Malkina, who wraps a device around his neck previously referred to as a Bolito. And this, if you don't know, is basically a battery-powered strangulation device which slowly constricts a metal wire around the victim's neck, killing them. And so we're just left to watch as Westray helplessly tries to remove the device while it tightens up until it finally cuts into his neck and just outright decapitates him, spraying blood all over the pavement as various passing commuters watch on in horror. So yeah, this is practically a saw trap John Kramer would be proud, and it's no surprise that it ended up on this list. Dr. Alex Durant, The Black Hole. Look, Disney is no stranger to including weirdly gnarly death scenes in their films, animated or live action alike. Though it's fair to say that 1979 sci-fi film The Black Hole isn't one of their more iconic outings. It does feature one of the most mind-bogglingly violent deaths in any Disney movie ever though, when poor Dr. Alex Durant is off by Maximilian, a robot bodyguard working for villain Dr. Hans Reinhardt. As Durant attempts to escape, Maximilian approaches him and deploys a whirring drill-like weapon. All Durant can then do is hold up a file to try and block the attack, but of course the drill just effortlessly barrels through it and then through Durant as well. While we don't see any blood, I mean, hey, Disney is only going to go so far, the horrifying reaction shots of Durant and his fellow captive, Dr. Kate McCrae, ensure that there's no ambiguity whatsoever about what just happened to this guy. Next up, Clyde's cellmate, law-abiding citizen. Law-abiding citizen features a number of memorably over-the-top deaths as protagonist Clyde Shelton exacts his absurdly convoluted, ultra-violent revenge scheme on the criminal justice system which failed his murdered wife and daughter. And while most of Shelton's killings have this heightened, unhinged quality to them, there's a more grounded one in the middle of the film that's all the more disturbing precisely because of just how matter-of-fact it is. See, after Shelton confesses to his vengeance-fueled murders, he ends up in prison and demands a fancy steak lunch in exchange for revealing where a missing lawyer is. And Shelton initially shares his lunch with his cellmate before then taking one of the steak's bones and repeatedly stabbing it into the guy's neck, causing him to bleed out in record time. Next, we have Andy, Lost Highway. It's a testament to the overpowering strangeness of David Lynch's Lost Highway that this utterly deranged death scene isn't talked about nearly enough, despite being one of the grimmest moments in the late filmmaker's entire filmography. Near the end of the movie, Pete gets into a fight with Andy, resulting in Andy falling headfirst into a glass coffee table, killing him instantly. And to be clear, this isn't simply the case that Andy hit his head and then died. Lynch goes in for a closer look and shows that the guy's head was straight up impaled on the coffee table. Somehow. Again, it's a moment that gets lost in a film that's so aggressively strange from start to finish, as you might expect, but it's honestly one of the more hardcore death scenes of Lynch's whole career, outside some of the stuff that goes down in Twin Peaks: The Return. Next up, we have Arthur Eden's in Michael Clayton. Michael Clayton received plenty of attention on original release in 2007 and even won Tilda Swinton a Best Supporting Actress Oscar. Yet it sadly isn't really talked too much about these days, nor is its skin-crawlingly eerie central murder scene. Once the deeply shady agricultural conglomerate UNorth learns that lawyer Arthur Edens has proof that they knew their weed killer caused hundreds of deaths, the company's Counsellor, Karen Crowder, instructs two operatives to kill Arthur. I do think it would have been really cool if these two operatives were Chrissy and Paulie from The Sopranos. In my headcanon, they did this job, and they did it much funnier, of course. But far from the typicality of a thriller, Arthur isn't killed in a dramatic fashion by way of a hit and run or a gunshot to the head. He's actually subdued in a more disconcertingly clinical way. The aforementioned operatives, not Chrissy and Paulie, incapacitate Arthur at his home, drag him to his bathroom, and then inject him with a drug overdose, staging it to look like a suicide. There's nothing melodramatic or flashy about it at all. There's no music, no wild camera work, just two professionals murdering someone with extreme efficiency. Next up is Sophie, I Origins. Mike Cahill's 2014 sci-fi thriller I Origins has largely flown under the radar since release, no matter that it features one of the most disturbing death scenes of any film from the past decade plus. Midway through the movie, protagonist Ian gets trapped in an elevator with his love interest, Sophie. Ian manages to climb free to the next floor, and after some hesitation, Sophie does appear to climb to safety as well, just before the elevator suddenly starts moving again. Though the pair initially laugh in exasperated relief, the scene soon enough turns to absolute horror when Sophie becomes unresponsive and Ian realizes that the bottom half of her has actually been cut off. We only see brief, shadowy glimpses of the gory outcome, but the sheer idea of it, not to mention Ian's traumatized reaction, makes it pure nightmare fuel all the same. Kelly Summer dragged across concrete. S. Craig Zahler is a filmmaker with a real knack for delivering savagely violent death scenes, and while he made us all wince in Bone Tomahawk and brawl in Cell Block 99, he took things, shockingly, I know I didn't know there were crueler levels than this, but to an even crueler level in his brutal cop thriller Dragged Across Concrete. Shortly before the movie's mid-film bank robbery sequence, we're painstakingly introduced to an employee of said bank, Kelly, who is incredibly reluctant to return to work following her maternity leave. Hell, she even almost stays home with her infant son and has to be coaxed into going to work by her husband, who literally locks her out the house. Kelly then turns up to work and is welcomed enthusiastically by her co-workers, only for armed robbers to then suddenly assault the bank. She then tries to help a colleague and send an email to the police, only to be shot in the hand. As she sits up, she clutches her son's booty and asks the robbers to ensure that it gets to her baby before they respond by peppering her head with machine gun fire, causing it to instantly explode. It's such a mean-spirited and unsettling death as to almost border on comedically nasty, but the fact that Kelly isn't mentioned again in the film lends it a truly haunting quality. And finally, we have Troy from Snowtown. Justin Kurzel's 2011 thriller Snowtown is a criminally underseen dramatization of the real-life Snowtown murders, and an absolutely grueling sit from start to finish. But its single most soul-searing moment occurs when protagonist Jamie's abusive half-brother Troy is tortured by Jamie's new ultra-violent father figure, John. Eventually, Jamie decides to intervene and administer a mercy killing to his half-brother, pulling the cord tight and strangling Troy to death once and for all. This entire sequence goes on for about 5 agonizing minutes, with the director refusing to cut away as the life is slowly squeezed out of his character. And considering how films often incorrectly depict strangulation as a quick, easy way to kill someone, it was incredibly shocking to see it depicted in such a detached and clinical fashion as it was here. And of course, it goes without saying that knowing this actually happened makes it that much more discomforting.